Hi, everybody. This is Janet Belsky, and I'm on to episode 3 of my Lifespan Lecture Series. Today, we're going to be talking about memory, and I am going to tell you what we developmentalists know, and we're also going to talk about what happens when you go for a test of your memory in the psychology laboratory. Focusing on that frightening thing called memory in old age, and another frightening thing called mild cognitive impairment. Now, I am, as it says here, a developmentalist, so I have a different take on memory than somebody who would do the testing of your memory in the office. That's a neuropsychologist. Let's begin by looking at a quiz. Memory is a function of the physical integrity of the brain. Emotions are not really involved. I think many of us would say, yeah, it all has to do just with how your brain looks, basically. And it's not your feelings. Number 2, neuropsychological evaluations. Those are the tests of cognition that you get when you're referred for issues with your memory to a psychologist. Give us the best picture, that they're supposed to be the fullest picture of really how we're functioning mentally in later life. Is that true or false? Finally, doing mental games and learning totally new things is the best way to protect our aging mind and to help prevent dementia. That's what people will typically tell you, right? Go do something different. Try those mental games. But I'm going to tell you, all of those are not true. So let me begin my lecture and making the case. First, I'm going to talk about the kinds of mental complaints that you and I have as we reach our age. What's bothering us? Then we're going to talk about what the research in the psych laboratory shows, general psychology research. Then we're going to take a deep look at what happens when you go for a test to a neuropsychologist when you're worried about your memory. What happens? And then I'm going to argue that those tests are really kind of minimizing what we guys can do. Then we're going to finally talk about how I feel, and I'm going to back it up, and you'll see I'm right, guys? I feel about what's best for your memory as you get to be into your 70s and above. Here are some of the complaints that we tend to have, all of us. I can't remember names I should know. Gee, did I see that movie? I know I loved that movie, but I can't remember what it was about at all. I can't remember the name of my favorite singer. What's her name? I've loved her work for decades. Another issue is I seem to be having more trouble concentrating. I have trouble sitting in the movie and following the plot. And when people are talking, it's a big problem. I'm often thinking about something else. I was never like this before. Finally, I'm having a lot of trouble processing information. When too much is going on, I'm really feeling like I can't get it together. Now, here's an example of what happens to me. I get to the corner and there are 6 intersections. One says don't walk, one says do walk, and there's a lot of people there. And I'm thinking to myself, how am I going to get across the street? There's just too much going on for me. Here's another example. Here's a woman and she's cooking, and she has to put that in there. She has to whisk this out, and she's looking around. There's another pot on there, and guess what? The phone rang. And now I have to answer the phone while I'm cooking, and this dish needs to be timed, and all of a sudden, it's all getting away from me mentally. Too much is going on. This is really a recent problem because I could do this at 40, fine. What does the research show? Now we're getting to the science. Yes, it is true that as we get older, and really starting in our 20s and 30s, it's much harder to remember new bits of information. Yes, that as we get older, focusing is more difficult. It's harder to pay attention to things. And finally, by the 70s, the thing that really goes is you can't multitask. Probably couldn't multitask in your 30s, but it's really impossible by the time you reach your 70s. So here's a guy who's given it a good shot. He's looking on his cell phone, he's talking, he's looking at his computer, he's writing things down, and he looks like he's doing just fine. He looks very, very happy. He's listening to people. I'd like you guys to think of whether those kinds of issues are beginning to give you trouble now. I know they're giving me trouble. The conclusion, bottom line, as we get older, really starting with the most difficult tasks in the 30s, our thinking processes get less nimble, they get less flexible, and generally they get slower. But not all kinds of memory tasks are the same. Older people are very bad at remembering details. Here's an example. You're walking down the street and you see somebody and you say, "Hey, I know that person. But what's her name? And exactly where did I meet her? But her face looks so familiar to me, but I can't pick out the details of the situation." Here's another one. I vividly remember that wonderful lake cottage I lived in. There it is. It was beautiful and yellow. But when exactly did I live there? What years was it? That's kind of a blank, which explains why researchers classify memory into different types. One is the details, and it goes by a beautiful name, episodic memory. Your life is composed of millions of episodes. If we had to remember every episode of life, we'd be in huge trouble, wouldn't we? We can't do that. But remembering details does tend to get harder as you get older. But there's a different kind of memory that's pretty good as you get older, and that's called semantic memory. And those are the facts that are really in your brain. So here's a classic example. Somebody asks you for your social security number and you remember it right away. And you might forget it occasionally, which freaks you out completely, doesn't it, guys? But basically, you know that information. Somebody asks you for your address, your date of birth, you can spit that stuff right out. You're going to know a lot about the world. That's in your brain, your world knowledge and your career knowledge. Somebody asked me about developmental psych. When do you reach puberty? Somebody asked me that last night, and I knew exactly when the ballpark age was. I spit that out. Who was late, who was early, that's in my knowledge base. And actually, I would remember the person I just met. I'd remember her name easily, because if it was the name of my own daughter, I could hook it in to my basic knowledge base. So it would turn into semantic memory if it was interesting and if I could relate it to things in my life. There's a third type of memory, and that's called procedural memory. Here it is. And that's skills that we do automatically. Now, a huge number of things that are in our brain are completely unconscious. Half of what we know is on automatic pilot, and we can drive even if we forgot how to get home or our address. Basically, this memory is going to have a different age pattern than the other two. Episodic memory declines beginning very early in life, details. Semantic memory rises because we know more, don't we, as we get older? And then in our 60s, it kind of reaches a plateau and then it declines. But procedural memory can last your whole life. And actually, it's a big problem because if you have Alzheimer's, people with early Alzheimer's, not later Alzheimer's, can get in the car, they can drive, but they don't know where they're going. And that's why we have these things called senior alerts. They know how to do the automatic things, they just don't know. The rest of their memory is kind of not so good. Bottom line, many types of memory do get worse. and early in life are the most complicated memory tasks. But your knowledge and your habits tend to remain until late in life, particularly your habits. But you're still worried. And you say to yourself, I'm losing it really. I'm having all the trouble I was talking about before, and I want to go have my memory tested. So I'm going to go see my primary care doctor. You know, we all know that's the conduit to seeing the neuropsychologist. The doctor's going to give me a test, and she's going to give me a thorough physical, because my memory could be due to lots of other things. Depression, we could all list what those things are. Physical problems affect your memory. She gave me a short screening test, and if there's a cutoff for my age, and if I fall below the cutoff point, the doctor is going to say to me, well, I don't think there's a problem, Janet, but I think maybe you should go for to a neuropsychologist. He or she is going to give us another big interview testing, everything from depression to sleep apnea. But then they're going to give us a series of basic neuropsychological tests, and they're going to take about an hour and a half. And they're going to tell you things like, now I'm giving you a test, but don't get anxious. Famous last words. Actually, we have research that when people are told that you're testing their memory, they do much worse. So it's a hope not to get anxious. And here's a sample of the kinds of tests they use. This is called executive functions. And basically, it's how well you can shift focus. Name the color on each printed word. Then when I say switch, name the word. Okay, this is tough. I got to name the color. It says red, but it's green. And then when I say switch, you got to name the word. And it's going to test how well you can really manipulate your mind to focus on one thing. They'll give you probably about 6 or 7 tests of episodic memory. Repeat these numbers forward. They're going to give them to you verbally, and then say them backward. Forward, then in your mind, you have to manipulate it so you can say them in reverse order. I'm going to give you 3 words, or I'm going to give you a story, and I want you to remember what I said right now, and then after I talk a while, what were the words I gave you before? Tell me the story. There are shapes on a page, triangles, squares. Take it away. What were the shapes? What were the shapes rotated? And maybe I'm going to ask you to do that 10 minutes later. What were the shapes I gave you 10 minutes ago? This is an interesting one. Say as many words that start with B as fast as you can. Now, if you're like me, the first word that you thought of was bitch. But then you said to yourself, should I really tell the doctor that bitch is the first word and maybe balls is the second one? Give yourself a couple seconds there, and then you say, oh, all right. Frankly, all of these tests are timed. And so you lost a lot of time by thinking about whether you should say it to the doctor or not. If you rank very low compared to the people your age, the average person, they're going to give you a terrible diagnosis called mild cognitive impairment. It doesn't mean you have dementia, but you're getting there. You're on an accelerated path, and there's statistics, 15% get it in the next year, 15% the year after that. By about year 3, 50-50, you're going to have Alzheimer's or some other dementia. Here's your bell-shaped curve. You're testing for a significant number, maybe the 30th percentile, 20th percentile compared to people your age, and they look at that pattern to give you your full score. Well, what can I do about this, doc? And is there medicine that's going to help me? And the doctor's going to say to you, well, exercise, eat right. No, there really isn't a medicine that's going to, maybe temporarily might give you a medicine, but there is no medicine that can slow the neurological process of decline that's going on. And here is sort of the way you look. I've got this cloud over my head, and I'm basically waiting until Alzheimer's kicks in. But here comes me, the developmentalist. I'm thinking to myself, all of these tests are measuring episodic skills. They're measuring how quick I am. They're measuring my memory of things that I never knew before, like letters rotating. They're measuring things that really are not in my knowledge base at all. What they're not measuring is all the stuff that is in my knowledge base or my semantic knowledge. And here we have a chart. These things normally decline dramatically. Notice as we talk, they're all episodic. These things tend to be stable or rise with age. Now, you might want to take a minute and think about, have somebody test your vocabulary, because they do that with me. They do that with me. And I think my vocabulary is just as good as it was when I was 20. I'm a pretty good, that's a skill of mine. I'm a pretty good whiz at vocabulary, but none of these tests are going to measure any of that stuff. Therefore, by only testing what's going wrong, neuropsychologists, and put that in parentheses, everyone else, minimize the mental abilities of me and other older people. Their job is to look at what's empty in the glass, not what you still can do. And that's what we do with older people. That's called ageism. Generally speaking, we equate old age with mental decline, don't we, guys? So when we see an old person, particularly somebody who's frail, we assume that they have Alzheimer's. Now, here's an example. You're not going to do this so much with me because I'm looking pretty good, but here's an example of a man who is walking very slowly, and he's older. If you come up to him, and I want you to be honest, are you going to talk to him in a thing called elder speak? Hi, Mr. So-and-so, how are you doing today? Is everything okay? Now, I was trained as a gerontologist, and I used to get crazy when people treated brilliant older people like they were doddering idiots. And that happened to me many, many times when I would go out, let's say to a restaurant with a very smart older person, and the server who was 18 treated that person as if they were basically a baby. That's what elder speak is. Please don't do that. Don't assume just because somebody looks like they're having physical problems and they're older that they've got Alzheimer's. I'm looking at the full part of the glass. What is it that we do well as we get older, particularly in the area of memory? And actually, what do we do well at any age? The answer is we remember things that are meaningful to our lives. So, for instance, if this guy is a wonderful musician, he will remember how to play. But he may not be as good as he was. His hands may not be as good, but he will remember the tunes. He will remember his skill pretty well as he gets older. And by the way, if he's an exceptional musician, he's going to remember better than a young person. Here's a guy who is with his wife. They are into gardening and trees. They're going to remember when oranges ripen. They're going to remember all the skills related to their passions, but those skills are never going to be tested in the laboratory, are they? Meaningful stuff is what we remember, and we also remember the stuff that's emotionally important. So if you look back into your memory, you're going to remember things that were really iconic for you. That's a wonderful word, isn't it? Think back and you'll remember exactly what happened on your wedding day. I'm thinking now and I remember everything that happened. It's about 50 years ago. And when I look in my book, I remember what it was like to be in love, and hopefully I'm still in love with my partner, but it gives us a real thrill to think back and remember those emotionally important things. We can remember things that were not so good. That's also in the human psyche, like when you had a terrible fight and you almost got a divorce. You'll remember that stuff too, because that's also emotionally important. But the rest of the stuff fades into ether, what we normally did decades of our life. Conclusion. In order to have a good memory, you need to make things memorable. And here's the kind of thing that this couple is likely to remember for a very long time, not seeing their grandchild for a year, and he came back and we had a wonderful day together. And so maybe I want to see my grandchild a little bit more often. I want to do the things that are really emotionally important to me. And that's what I'm going to focus on. I'm not going to spend millions buying those mental games because, they're not important. By the way, they don't really work either. They don't transfer to other stuff in life. You might be really good at doing mental games, but whether you're going to be good at remembering where you left your socks, it's a whole different kind of memory. Do them if you love them, but only if you love them. Why should you learn totally new things? Again, it's the same issue. Unless you want to, it's not going to make a difference in your life to try just something different, learning something different to pump up your mind. If you forget something important, which you're likely to do, somebody's name who you really should know, an event like the movie that you saw, and and they say, well, did we really see that movie? And you say, I can't remember a thing about it. Shift focus and say, well, wait a second, here's what I did today. I did this, 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 and hopefully it wasn't too many things, but I'm competent. That's who I really am, not those little details that I forgot. My advice is to focus on your main passions, the things that you're really interested in, because being interested in the world and in people is the best medicine to combat mental decline. So here we have a grandma and her grandchild, and she's pointing things out, and just the process of that and focusing on what she loves and teaching the grandchild is going to be better than any mental game at helping her memory. And here's the capper. I know this is true because I easily constructed this PowerPoint, and I started a new Belsky Being Human lecture career based on my knowledge, because I've been writing textbooks for 50 years, even though last year I was diagnosed as mildly cognitively impaired. And I got so angry that I actually sent the guy these PowerPoints. And I said, you're wrong, Kai. I'm not the way you're expecting me to be. And by the way, I did very badly on those tests. Some of them I was really in the high dementia range. Several of them, actually. So if you like this lecture, join me as I draw on my half-century writing college textbooks to showcase everything that scientists know about the marvelous journey of life. Here is my website. It's www.belskybeinghuman.com. And check it out, and nice to see you, and hope to see you very soon again.